thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. This is Up for a Chat with Cindy O'Mara, Karen Smith, and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Kim Morrison.
And I'm Cindy O'Mara.
And we are so excited to bring to you part 2 of Warren Davies, the Unbreakable Farmer. If you haven't listened to last week's podcast, make sure you go back and listen to the first part of this rather tragic, heroic, and incredibly empathetic story of this remarkable man who's used his own break point to indeed make a change and now share that with the world. And we look forward to this week sharing with you the second part of this amazing story. If you had your time over, Warren, and you were back in those situations, what is the magic wand? What is it? What would you say to someone we know that this country is absolutely ferociously under attack, if you like, with fires and floods and hailstorms and so many things. Just here on the Sunshine Coast, we were just hit with a horrific storm that has wiped out macadamia crops and has wiped out beautiful farmers' work of years and years of work in one 20-minute downpour. What's your words of advice, or how would we support those people?
It's really hard and it's really challenging. And I can say that I still believe at heart I'm a farmer. But when I went to Texas the other week and, it was words can't even describe what it was like. It was terrible. And I've been lucky enough to have spoken in a lot of the places like Glen Innes and, places that have been affected by the bushfires now and understand how that happened, because it was just so diabolically dry in the middle of winter. And without rain, it was going to happen, and it had to have happened at some stage, because, it was just that tinder dry, and it's just hard to know what to say. But I think the biggest word, the word is empathy. And even if you haven't been a farmer, is just be empathetic to someone's situation. And the only, at the end of the day, the harshest thing that I can say to a farmer is that it's only a business. And, a hailstorm, a flood, a drought, whatever, they're just parts of business. But that's very harsh, because, as I've already explained, that it's more than a business, it's their whole life. And for some people, that I've spoken to, they're fourth generations on the same farm. They were born in the house that they live in and this sort of stuff. And to be faced with the same stuff that I was faced with is really hard. I was actually just watching something on Landline, a guy at Stanthorpe. He's been growing fruit there for years and ran out of water in May. His trees haven't had water since May, and he's employed a heap of backpackers just to go and knock all the fruit off the trees to hopefully save his trees. Well, there was 3 times during his conversation on the tally with the reporter where he was in tears. Like, it's hard stuff. Like, and it's really hard to know what to do. It's a real challenge. I sat on a plane for 2 hours flying up to Brisbane to drive out to and then the 3 or 4 hours drive out to Texas, thinking, really, what am I doing here? How am I going to be able to support these people? And I think it's just sharing your story. And even though most of the people are going through the same story, just to hear that someone else has been through it and they've survived, and it gives them maybe that glimmer of hope that, you just, it might all look doom and gloom, but at the end of the day, you do come out the other side. It's really hard to know what words to say, about support, because look, financial support is really good. Government's getting behind, people raising money and all that, but it's just the problem is the the situation is so big, you know, and I know myself, the first psychologist I ever went and seen, they summed up their prognosis was summed up in 10 minutes. They said, we know what your problem is. It's financial stress. Here's a couple of vouchers. They gave me 2 vouchers that their value was $250. Now, I'm not being ungrateful. I was grateful for those, but the day prior to my psychologist appointment, I just bought a load of grain to feed my cows. It cost me $15,500. So $250 wasn't really going to solve my financial stress. So I think the biggest thing, and one of the things that really shone home to me in Texas, because they're right on the border of New South Wales and Queensland, they are in no man's land, and just to be recognised that they're there, and that they are doing it hard, and with it, whether you support them by visiting their town and spending some money or whatever it is, they're the things that are important. I think that comes back to really that basic connection thing. There's seems in Australia, like I know when we left Melbourne, when I was a 15-year-old kid, I think most people knew someone on a farm. That's kind of over the last 30 odd years has now dissipated, where I've done a couple of talks in primary schools in Melbourne just to try and get that country city connection back and going, because some kids that were in that class, one of those classes, that didn't even realise that milk didn't come from a carton, and that wool didn't grow on a tree, all those sort of things, that people have lost that connection. I think just understanding that, and understanding, I think that farmers have been painted with this really bad outlook because of lots of things that are going on in the political environment and activism and all this sort of stuff. But farmers are just people like you and me. They're just trying to earn a living, and they're doing it the best way that they can do. And most of the stuff they're doing is, generations are old, and it's not going to change overnight. If people believe it's wrong, well, it's not going to change just by the snap of a finger, and that's adding pressure to all these communities as well as the drought. So we need to just be empathetic to people's situations, get back to being, human, and have care and genuine care for each other.
One of the things that there's so much going on because of the fires and the drought and all of that, and there is some blame being thrown around. Is it the greenies? Some people are blaming the farmers and their farming methods. Your silent partner, Mother Nature. Would there have been a drought? I've been listening to this guy that was saying that there's a 172-year cycle, and we are in the drought part of the 172-year cycle. And it was predicted back in the 20s that it would hit around 2008, or maybe it was later, I can't remember. But how do farmers feel when townies get up in arms about the chemicals they're using, the farming practices, the antibiotics used on animals? Well, how do farmers feel about that?
Well, farmers are... I think farmers are the most proactive acceptors of change that, out of everybody, out of any industry in Australia, I reckon. Like dairy farmers in particular, they're one of the biggest uptakers of technology in the world, just because, that's, trying to get better. So farmers are always looking for the best way to do things, and a lot of what happens is just painted by external forces of this is what farmers do. Like, I can tell you right now, the stuff that you see around animal welfare that you see, like, I don't know how people get the film and all that sort of stuff that they get, but I've worked on lots of farms and never seen anything ever happen on farms like what you see on those things. Like, You know, and there's things that you have to, like, there's things that happen on farms, and that's the business, and it's working, and people have changed the way, just over the last 30 years, have changed the way they've done, and they're always trying to adapt. And because one of the biggest things is that you're supplying a market that demands this stuff, so you're always trying to better what you're doing, and you're always trying to find the best practice, your best practice.
Yeah, I went to an amazing, it was called Agvention.
Yeah.
And it was put on by Boss Rural or Rural Boss, I can never remember which one it was, up in Kandanga, up in Queensland. And we had some pretty interesting people coming and speaking. And one of them was a gentleman called, and his business was called Providence. And he had figured out and got in Victoria, I think it was, not New South Wales, or was it northern? It was either southern New South Wales or northern Victoria. And it was New South Wales, sorry. He had figured out how to take the abattoir, and this was a big truck, the abattoir to the farm so that the cattle could be less stressed.
Yeah, how cool is he? I've seen that. These purpose-built vans, or it's a big unit that rolls onto the farm, and they set up, and it's like a abattoir. Yeah. So all these things are happening all the time, and that's the thing that people don't see. And I suppose the end thing is anyone that, there's obviously things that would shock townies on a farm. I'm not going to walk away from that. That's just because farming's farming. Both to humans as well as animals, But the thing is that unless you've been there and lived it and experienced it, how do you know? Like, you're only taking second or third or fourth hand information and saying, well, that's right. Well, no one does that. It doesn't in anything in your life. You want to know the information for yourself. So do you go and get that information yourself, or are you just relying on, this? So most of it's hearsay that's in the media. That's what and look, it's happening between farmers. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan's a big example of that in our area, that, farmers on the downstream side of the Murray-Darling Basin are pointing the fingers to the north end, to the cotton growers, and blaming them. Listen, I've crossed the Condamine River countless times in the last 18 months in my speaking travels. I've never seen water in it once, and it's got nothing to do with pumping. It's got to do with the worst drought in history. So if water's not running into the Condamine River at the top end of the Murray-Darling Basin, how do you expect water to run out the bottom end? And that's just simple hydraulics. But the thing with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is now tearing rural communities apart, where now rural communities are infighting because of that sort of stuff, instead of, being, as I say, one of my biggest things that I talk about is being connected to community, because within community, the power of that community is shared wisdom. We've all travelled a journey. We've all collected wisdom along the way. We need to be sharing that wisdom to be able to find solutions to the problems that we face on a global scale.
It's interesting because we're seeing this farmer pitted against farmer, blame, not taking responsibility. We don't only just see it in the farmers. We're seeing it in mothers at the moment. The mother pitted against the mother in the vaccine wars. I'm seeing it all the time, and I just think, what are we doing? We all have wisdom. We all understand, our children. We all understand our land. We understand what we've done and how we've done it. Yeah. And if we can all work together and perhaps work against the multinationals that I think are the ones that are firing up the people. So I look at, in farming, and I look at the genetically modified seeds, and I look at the chemicals that are being used, from chlorpyrifos to glyphosate to paraquat or something like that. And that's just 3 of the many chemicals that are being used. But what's happening is the farmers are almost in, they're in like a frozen state, because They know what is right, but this is the road they've been told to go down. And to go back to the way that they know is the right thing to do is hard. So then the farmer fights the farmer, as opposed to the farmers getting together and saying, how can we do this as a community? How can we make change? And I'm starting to see it in the community of farmers called the Regenerative Farming Group. And I watch them support each other and help each other. And, you know, they have, even though their communities may not be next door to each other, they're within that community of and under the umbrella of regen farming. And I see them helping. I see farmers travelling like you're travelling and, you know, speaking with them and going into communities. And I think they feel the same way as you, Warren, is that, what am I doing here? How am I going to help these people? But you've experienced it, they've experienced it, and they know that. And I just wish we would see a collaboration of communities, not only in farming, but in parenting and in education and even in daycare. Daycare has become really expensive, and I've heard about parents in the Sunshine Coast region, like 1,000 families that are all helping each other because daycare prices are so expensive. Kids get sick in daycare, and the scenario goes on. So what you're bringing up for me, Warren, is a worldwide crisis, not just a farming crisis, where we need to come back to community and look away from the world and what's happening in the world and come back to our community, which then comes back to the individual looking after themselves, feeding themselves properly, making sure they've got that resilience, giving themselves some mental health time, having family time, going and having family dinners together, working within their community, working as a community that helps each other out. Like I'm from a farming background, so my uncles, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were all farmers, and they were community farmers. They helped each other out. When there was weeding to be done, they'd go and all weed and farm together. When there was harvest to be done, they'd go harvest together. But farming these days has become something very isolated. Parenting these days has become something very isolated. And I think what you're doing and talking about community and getting back into it. So can we go there now? Can you tell us what the Unbreakable Farmer is doing and what's your purpose and how you're helping people?
Yeah, just on that point, before I tell you what my mission is that I did a lecture for Melbourne Uni the other night in Wangaratta to a room full of health professionals, and that's what I said. I think, and this is around mental health, but it applies to everything, is that if we're waiting for the government or for some magic wand to fix these things, you know, the state of whatever the situation is to rectify it, it's not going to happen. We need to come back to the grassroots and build it from the community and upwards instead of coming from the top down. We need to build it from the community up and build resilience in those communities to be able to rise instead of waiting for someone to fix. That's what I said to these health professionals. We need to build this from our own communities. We need to be building, more mentally healthy, resilient communities from the grassroots level, not from above, kind of thing. So,
couldn't agree more. We have to start from the ground up, a grassroots movement, and because the government, they're over their heads. I don't think they really know what they're doing anymore. I just think that communities do.
Yeah, and I think that what's happening in your community, so that's where it's got to be built from. But my mission, what the Unbreakable Farmer is all about, is a three-part mission. And the first part is around creating awareness and education around mental health and wellbeing, and particularly in regional and rural communities, because that's where I come from. That's what I'm passionate about, and I actually see it in my own community. So then to go to even more remote communities, and it can only be exacerbated by, the tyranny of distance and isolation. So that's my first part of my mission. The second part is to inspire conversations, to get people actually talking about this stuff, not making it a taboo subject. And particularly, I don't particularly, focus my talks as men's only talk. I talk more about community well-being instead of men's mental health well-being. It's more of community, to inspire those conversations, get people talking, and particularly the blokes in those communities to be able to connect with, their partners and their families and be able to share how they're feeling and not feel that that's a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength and courage. And my third part of my mission is to enable people to seek help in a safe environment and free from stigma. And those three things are kind of my three lessons that I learnt from my journey in a way, shape, or form. And so they're and they're pretty universal. It doesn't necessarily have to relate to your mental health and well-being. It just happens that that's my story and that's what I share. But about create awareness and some education around whatever it is, and then inspire conversations about it, and then enable people to seek help if they need to.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's very universal. I was listening to a person that I've watched for 10 years. He's quite an educated person out of Harvard University, and his thing to get well health-wise was to create awareness and education, inspire people to not only have conversations about it, but to have change by doing it step by step and doing it in a safe environment without stigma. So it was like he just repeated exactly what he said, and I'm sure you've never heard him say that before, and he's never heard you say it before. But he was talking about autoimmune disease and how it's become, something that's huge in health. So I just love your mission, and I love those three parts: awareness and education, inspire conversation, and enable people to seek help in a safe environment without stigma. Have you got a website?
Yeah, so it's www.theunbreakablefarmer.com.au, or you can catch me on Facebook as well.
Okay.
Warren, I just would love to ask you, you're going into schools, you're going into farming communities with this three-pronged pillar, which I absolutely love. And I'd love you to share with us the story of the young woman who, you and I spoke about this, and Cindy, you'll appreciate this, but for many people, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a friend, whether you're a co-worker, sharing our story, sometimes we have no idea of the impact that it can actually have. And unless somebody tells you what your story's done for them, you may never know. And not that we need to know, but I think sometimes when you get feedback, particularly with the story that you shared, it just makes you realise, and I would imagine for you too, Warren, it's what keeps you going.
Yep, that's the real driver for me. It's something that I've come to learn. So as you evolve as a speaker, or as you start sharing, you learn things along the way. And when I first started speaking, I had not the courage to share my mental health journey. It was more about persistence, resilience, persistence, and determination. Some of the stuff that those three things that I needed to be able to negotiate my farming journey. Didn't have the courage to share my mental health journey. It was only until I started sharing some of that I started getting more speaking gigs, and then 10% of my speaking, my presentation was made up of my mental health journey, and then all of a sudden to what it's evolved to now, where it's basically all intertwined into the story that I share. But one of the biggest things that I've learnt by going out and sharing my story is that there's power in storytelling. And when I first started on this journey, and the facilitator or my mentor told me that, there's power in your story, and I'm thinking, yeah, sure, mate, who'd want to listen to me? I now realise that you can have an impact, and I share this story without trying to pump, in no way, shape or form trying to pump my own tyres. It's just to purely illustrate the power of sharing your story. And what happened is I was speaking at an event, and after that event, a girl come and touched me on the elbow and said, "Can I have 10 minutes of your time?" And it was first time it's really someone had come up after me and engaged straight after a talk. It happens more and more now. And this story that I'm telling now, I could have told about a story that happened 2 weeks ago with the same sort of scenario. But this girl come up, and she actually was not even at the presentation. She was only a waiter at the dinner. And anyway, I got there after I had finished talking to a group of people. I went and sat down on the stage with this girl, and anyway, she shared her story with me. And the number one lesson that I learnt straight off the bat was this girl was 15 years old, and I had kids at similar ages. That the biggest lesson that I learnt is not necessarily your kids aren't necessarily going to come and talk to you about how they're feeling. That was my biggest straight away aha lesson that I learnt from this conversation that I had. But as the conversation unfolded, it was the young girl was sharing her story with me, and it was similar to mine. She was struggling with her mental health. She'd been bullied at school, so forth and so on, and it kept going. And at the end of that, I was pretty chuffed with myself, to be totally honest. A bit of a pat yourself on the back kind of moment. And I gave her a hug, and I said, "Look, if there's anything I can do to help you, please reach out and contact me." And from that day, really, we've really not had any conversations since that day. But one thing that happened the next morning as I was leaving to fly back home, her mum messaged me on Facebook and just thanked me for spending some time with her daughter, and explained how she come home, and she was all enthusiastic, and that her mood had changed dramatically. And I thought, oh, that's pretty special. But then her mum actually shared a little bit more about her story, and this girl was in a pretty bad way with her mental health. And this was about 2 years ago, and we'd been in constant contact, her mum and I, just checking in with each other every now and again, making sure, she'd check in and make sure I was okay, and, I would make sure her daughter was okay. And then I lost contact with them for a couple of months. And what had happened is the young girl actually ended up in a hospital, in the mental health clinic, and she was there for quite a while, for 7 weeks. And she was just lucky that she had her family around her to support her and recognise the signs and, make sure that she got that support. And lucky for the young girl, she come out of the hospital and then integrated back into school. But I think that the most powerful part of this story, and as I said, I don't say it to pump my own tyres up, it's to demonstrate this point. And it was, again, I was flying to Queensland to go and speak, and for Are You OK Day, and the mum messaged me again and said, "I just want to let you know that my daughter's going to be standing up in front of 500 of her school friends tomorrow for Are You OK Day and sharing her story." And for me, as a speaker, that was the ultimate compliment, because she was, by standing up and sharing her story, she was actually paying my story forward, which was, as I said, a total compliment. Once I got back, a couple of days later, the young girl sent me the video of her talk, and it was very brave. She stood there, and knowing that there was kids in the audience that were the bullies, that were the kids that she'd been struggling with, was a real challenge for her to do. But I was so proud of her, I was at a time, I've been speaking for about 2 years, and I was kind of in this mindset of, I wasn't making much money out of it. Is this going to be sustainable? Is anyone really listening? And she sent me a one-line little text that changed everything on its head for me, and now that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. And that little line said, if I never heard you share your story, Warren, I could have never shared mine. And it had a little red love heart. And that was my tipping point. That was, I know that I'm on the right path. I've found my purpose and I've refound my identity, and I've pushed forward. The real kicker of that story was the next day at school, 10 kids went to the school counsellor. So the power of the storytelling is not only did she share my story forward, but 10 kids went and paid her story forward by going and seeking help. And I think that's really important. And that comes down to that part of my mission about inspiring conversations, because, as I said, we've all got a story, and all our stories are unique to us. They might be travelling a similar path to somebody else, but it's your unique story. And within that, there's some wisdom that you need to share. And as I said, my facilitator said to me when I said I didn't think I had or my mentor, when I didn't have a story to share, they said, well, how could you be so selfish and not share your story? And I think that's really important. Part of that storytelling is, we need to share stories, because we can, make a difference by sharing those stories, and that's really a driver of mine now.
Warren, it's so true what you just said about sharing stories. If you think about how did information get passed down when we didn't have writing tools or computers and things like that, it was by storytelling. The Australian Aboriginal people had the dream time, and we could go through every culture in the world, and it was all by stories. And we've lost the art of storytelling. We give information, we don't tell a story. And I think that is so good. I'm wondering if you have another amazing story like that last one that is inspiring and can help people through whatever they might be going through. Do you have another one that comes to mind?
I'm just trying to think. It's probably another story that I share, and it's particularly around, it's really a farming kind of thing, because I was lucky enough to speak at a big conference, and whenever I get up on stage, I always make a bit of a disclaimer and always make sure that people understand that I'm not a professional, as in a professional medical person. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a counsellor, social worker or any of those sort of things. I'm just me sharing my lived experience. And I always say, if people feel uncomfortable because I said some of the content will be challenging, they can leave the room by but as they leave, can they give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, just on how they're feeling? And if obviously it's a thumbs down, I'll have one of my gatekeepers, if not myself, will chase you out of the room. Now, after I did this big talk at this big conference, this guy come up to me, and he was about 6'6". I'm about 6'3", so he was taller than me, a big bloke, and he was 67 years old. And he called me every name under the sun. He come up to me and he said, "You're and you're and you're," and I said, "Hey, just a second, hold your horses. What's going on?" He goes, "I'm George." I said, "G'day, George. How are you, mate?" He goes, "Yeah, look, I come from way out the back of," he was way out somewhere in central Queensland. Big, burly, resilient farmer. And he said, and once again, he said, "You're an effort." And I said, "Rightio, what's going on?" He said, "You know that bit right at the start where you said, if you trigger anything or I feel uncomfortable, I'm to stand up and walk out of the room and give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down." I said, "Yeah, yes, yep. What's going on, George?" He said, "Well, how the hell was I meant to stand up in front of 600 people and walk out of the room and give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because I would have known that I was struggling?" And I said, "Mate, that's the whole point of it. We need to not be so ashamed of how we're feeling. He said, so I just had to sit there and bow my head, and I cried most of the way through your talk. And I said, but mate, that's what it was all about. If you felt uncomfortable, get up and walk out of the room, and you're not going to be judged by that. He said, yeah, but I'm one of the best farmers in the district, and if anyone knew that I was struggling, well, that's not really good for me, for me persona in the community, or whatever the words he used. And I said, well, mate, that's what it's all about. We're all struggling. We just need to identify it and make sure that we're seeking help and have conversations. So I said, here, do me a favour. I said, you've come and told me that now, so go and grab a beer and go and tell the three mates that were sitting with you. And sure enough, he did. He went and told them, because they come up and talked to me afterwards and said that he'd shared his story with them. So once again, that power of storytelling. But here he is, this big, gruff, tough, resilient farmer. And look, he'd hidden that story. He hadn't shared it. And the thing is, that's the power of sharing those stories. Like, he was just, but here he was blaming me because here I made him feel uncomfortable, got him, tears flowing down his eyes, and he said, but he couldn't stand up and face the crowd by standing up. And I said, well, but that's what it's all about, mate. If we all support each other, we can all help each other through whatever we're going through.
Yeah. It's a powerful, powerful tool, isn't it?
It is.
Both Cindy and I we've shared the same business coach, and one of the stories he talks about is the law of precession, which is for every action there is a reaction at a 90-degree angle. Often we don't even know about it. And the example he gives is every morning the bee gets up to go, and most people, when I ask the audience, what does the bee think when it wakes up? Everyone says to go and get pollen, but the bee doesn't wake up thinking it's going to go and get pollen. The bee wakes up every day to go and get nectar to bring back to the hive. And in the process of collecting nectar, his beautiful hairy little legs, or hers, get filled with pollen, and he cross-pollinates, germinates, and creates life. And the bee doesn't even know it. So he calls that your true purpose. And as much as I'm really sorry that you and many, many farmers have to endure these hardships, I do believe that your story and the power of you telling your story, your true purpose is, whilst you think it's storytelling, I think, Warren, we could safely assume that your true purpose is saving lives and giving hope. And again, I say that, I know you'd find that hard to hear because I know you're an incredibly humble man, but I think it could be the same with Cindy, Karen, and myself, and every other practitioner and person out there willing to share their story. Every mum, every teacher, every parent, every person out there, every dad. If we can continually share that conversation and the story of the good and the not so good, and together find ways where we can come together and create that shared wisdom through connection and communication, then indeed our true purpose could be greater than we could ever imagine.
Yeah. And look, and I've taken one of your stories from your talk to clarify one of my feelings that, and I think you spoke about Danny when he used to put the key into the hotel door room everywhere when he was off touring or commentating or whatever, and felt like it was opening a prison cell. And that's one of the things I still struggle with when I do my travelling and get to stay with some of the places that I get to stay, and I haven't got my family with me, and that's what it feels like for me. But it helped clarify that, I'm not the only person that feels like this. And that's just because of that story. So, and we can connect with stories because we can relate to them. And whether I stand up and why I share my story in its entirety, as in the growing up bit and then the farming bit and then the Unbreakable Farmer part, is that someone's going to relate somewhere along the way, whether it's, as that kid or as that fella on the footy field or as that farmer or that person in business or whatever it is. Someone's going to relate somewhere along the line to your story and take what they can from that story. It doesn't necessarily be in its whole entirety, but there might be one or two points that they pick up out of your story that, can change the way they look at something.
I agree. And it's through the power of turning up to those talks and inspiring your friends and family, if any of them are going through a tough time, to show up to these talks. I mean, nothing gets waved magically over you to take your pain away. And my true belief also is that we have to participate in this to go through. You've got to feel it to heal it, but you also have to actively participate. And that takes discipline and guts. And sometimes you may need other people to support you to create that discipline and that guts, or be that person's supporter. But I think what you've opened up here is a massive conversation, not only for farmers, but perhaps that's the metaphor for all of humanity, to get back to those grassroots, community. And that community can just be in your home, can't it? That community could just be in your school classroom. There are so many ways that we each can contribute. And here's the other thing that I've picked up from you along the way as well, is that my daughter actually said it when I invited her up on stage. And I said to her, if you could offer one piece of advice to this audience around staying above the line and being accountable, responsible, and taking ownership no matter what's going on in your world, what would it be? And her words were, I think you've got to remember sometimes, and most of the time, it's just a bad day, not a bad life.
Yeah.
Now, I get for farmers, it could be a bad year. So I'm not trying to underplay that. Please don't ever think I do that. But I do believe that everything, as Cindy's alluded to, is cycles. And I think one of the greatest things by you sharing your story, I think this is going to go beyond farmers, as you're probably already doing, as you talked about with the Melbourne University. Just one other thing, Warren, before we wind up, and I know this has been an extra long podcast, but I think it's been incredibly poignant and profound. One of the things that you and I had the privilege of speaking for was the Love Me, Love You organisation. Could you just tell us a little bit about that and how your work and work that we've done is helping young people?
Yeah, so luckily for the Love Me, Love You Foundation, I'm firstly lucky to be involved with the Love Me, Love You Foundation, and that helps me be able to, I suppose, continue my talk, my speaking into schools, where I'm able to facilitate a program that's been, accredited by the government and by Beyond Blue, etc., as a good program to, with sustainable outcomes and that needs to be, all those boxes that need to be ticked off to be able to present in schools or workplaces or wherever that might be. And I met Lance, who's the CEO, a couple of years back, and he asked if I could take up the role of regional manager with the Love Me, Love You Foundation, and so I did. And as I said, that gets me into schools and so forth around Australia, and I use that as well, in my own. Like when I went to Texas, I spoke at 5 or 6 farmer events, but I also did a couple of schools while I was there. So if I'm away from home, I try and fill my days up. So I'll go and speak at schools. I'm off to Sydney tomorrow to do an agricultural event on Wednesday, but I'm speaking at the Scots College in Sydney, speaking to 200 Year 10 boys on Thursday. So I'm lucky that I've got that flexibility, and Love Me, Love You has given me that flexibility to be able to speak. But lucky that event that you spoke at, that Liz Sefton and had organised it, and Liz had asked us to come on board as the charity partner to that event because Liz had lost her brother to suicide 27 years ago, and her brother Frank was a fellow who I played footy with and I knew reasonably well, and I know the ripple effect that his suicide had in our community at that time was huge. So to come on board as a charity partner to that was fantastic. We raised a lot of money from that event, and that's enabled me over the last 4 or 5 months to go to numerous schools and present our programs free of charge to those schools to be able to get the program into those schools. And I've also done even simple backyard barbecue events with a group of fellas, and that are struggling with a few things as well. So wide and varied things that I've been able to do just from that one event. So yeah, once again, the power of community coming together has done good. And and we're ongoing. I did a couple of events at schools just recently. I've got a few booked in for next year, all come from that one event. So I'm very grateful that Liz wanted to do that, and obviously through that I met you, Kim, and and I think that work that we've been able to do together as a group has had some good outcomes in our communities.
Oh, I feel incredibly privileged to Liz Sefton, absolutely. She's a gem indeed, and I'm very grateful for the work she does down in that area, in Echuca and Kyabram and Shepparton. It's incredible. It's an amazing community down there. How many people turn up to the events that you and I speak at down there as opposed to the big cities is quite extraordinary. So shout out to that beautiful area as well. Warren, is there any last message you would have for any of our listeners? Is there anything you'd like to finish or anything we haven't covered off?
I think probably just finish off the way that I finish all my talks off. I know they with my 3 lessons, which align with my mission, and the number one lesson that I learnt. So my lessons came from probably my biggest failures. And number one lesson is that communication is key. We need to have those conversations, those sometimes tough conversations with each other. They're vitally important. Communicating with each other is vitally important. The second lesson is about staying connected, and that's where that power of community, that staying connected to your community, and as you said, doesn't matter what that is to you, whether it's your family, your sporting group, your tennis club, whatever it is, or your broader community, or it's like sharing with a lot of at agricultural events that I do, even as an industry, that can be a community. We need to stay connected and keep sharing stories and sharing that wisdom to try and create some solutions. And thirdly, that lesson is, seek help, but at the same time, when you do seek that help, treat it seriously, especially around your mental health. Just because you haven't got a broken arm or a broken leg doesn't mean that it's any less more important. It's probably more important sometimes than your physical health is your mental health. So I think they're the 3 things that I'd like to leave people with.
Well, Cindy, can I ask you, knowing this extraordinary human that we've interviewed today, is there any one top takeaway for you from today?
I've already said it, but my silent business partner was Mother Nature. Love that. The mission, awareness and education, inspire conversation and enable to help people to seek help in the safe environment. The power of story. I could keep going because I've gotten so much out of this podcast or out of this interview. And Kim has been talking about you, Warren, since the minute she met you, I'm sure of it. And we've been trying to interview you, but we've just been off grid. Kim's been in France and I've been away and Karen's been away. So I feel very privileged that we finally got you. And I just think that this is something that everybody needs to listen to because there's so many pearls of wisdom within this this whole conversation that we've had. So thank you, Warren. Thank you so much for your time, number one, because I know, you're away a lot and you're off to Sydney tomorrow. So thank you.
Yep, I really appreciate the opportunity. I always say that I'm always truly grateful if someone wants to listen to my story, because I know everyone's time's valuable, and to take the time to actually listen to me share my story. Hopefully, even if it's not yourself, that you can take something away from it, that if not help yourself, help someone that's close to you.
Yeah, I agree. And as my gorgeous son said on stage when I asked him what it is to be above the line, and he just turned around and he said to believe in yourself, and if you can't find people who do, And I think there's always someone who loves you and would absolutely be devastated to think that you didn't reach out for help. And I don't think it's a sign of weakness in the very least. And perhaps, to take someone's call or cry for help seriously as well. And sometimes I think, Warren and Cindy, it might be, don't think that the strong ones are always so strong. Sometimes they're the ones that could do with a little "are you okay" as well. And I think that's something that I've taken from your talk today as well. But for all of our listeners, we hope that you have enjoyed this podcast as much as Cindy, Karen, Pseudo Karen, and I have enjoyed bringing it to you today. I just want to reiterate Warren's website, theunbreakablefarmer.com.au. If you're interested in the Love Me, Love You movement, which is lovemeloveyou.org.au. And I apologize for all our international listeners. I hope that you can find the beyondblue.org.au and lifeline.org.au. Also, just because we have mentioned such topics today, just remember the Lifeline phone number is 13114. I think on behalf of everybody, Warren, thank you for showing up, for being the person that you are, and for having the guts to share your story. I cannot begin to tell you how much it's impacting lives, and I feel very privileged to have had you on the show. To all you beautiful souls out there, you farmers that are doing it hard, from our hearts to yours, I think we as a community can speak volumes with where we spend our dollar. And of course, with Christmas approaching, there's certainly a number of charities and foundations that I know that our farmers could do with your help. So please reach out, be a part of the bigger part of the conversation, which is to support thy neighbour and to be the example by showing up with how we spend our dollar. I've enjoyed this week hugely. Thank you very, very much, Warren. You're a remarkable human. We love the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And, to all our community, we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, bringing it to you. So for all of you, if you would like to place a comment or get in touch with Warren via us, remember you can go to thewellnesscouch.com/up for a chat. You can go to the facebook.com/up for a chat. Now you can place your questions and comments there and reach out to Warren specifically and particularly around the Love Me, Love You Foundation if you'd like to get him into your schools so we can support more resilience, persistence and determination for our younger generations so that they can show up as all our generations before us have. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week where we can become part of the ripple effect that's changing the world. We'll see you then.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.